Good afternoon on this beautiful sunny day in sunny, warm South Florida. I made a video about the um, pros of South Korea. Now I'm going to make a video on the cons of South Korea. They're all my personal opinions. Now, before I go on, if you're going to live in another country as a foreigner, whether it's Korea or anywhere, you need to do your best. It's your responsibility to learn as much as you can about the culture and to adjust to it as best you can. Okay? Not sure if you have to adjust fully, but if you can't adjust enough, it's probably time to go. Okay? So I'm making this video humbly. Every country, including my own country, has cons. So I'm not saying that this country is a terrible place. It's just my experience. And with that being said, I'm going to make my cons. My first con is the air pollution in this country is very bad. Okay, in Korea, in big cities especially if you live next to Seoul, air pollution is not the best quality. Okay, I've been hearing it for years, past 3.5 years. Many Koreans say it's all China's fault. Okay, maybe China has something to do with a lot of it, but I don't think that it's all China's fault. I don't think that it is entirely the fault of the Chinese, because there's a lot of factories in Korea. I live next to a factory, and in that area, there is terrible air pollution. Okay, whenever I go in my area, the area where I live, air pollution gets much worse. So, air pollution is not the best quality. Now, in any big city, it's not the best. However, if you're in the countryside or in the mountains, the air quality is good. So keep that in mind. It's not like literally everywhere, but the air quality is not the best. Especially when you walk in near busy streets, the exhaust fumes from the cars is pretty bad. And unfortunately, everywhere you go, people smoke cigarettes almost everywhere. And the people that are doing it don't care about the fact that not everyone wants to smell that. So people in Korea typically are not going to think to themselves, okay, I'll go over here because maybe someone doesn't want to smell this. Nope, they just smoke anywhere. And if you smell it, tough. So unfortunately, that's the case. So air pollution is not the best quality. Fine dust is a problem. I do not believe it's not all of China's fault, contrary to popular belief in Korea. Another thing I wanted to talk about is spitting. People spit everywhere, but in Korea, if you've lived in Korea or even if you've visited, there's a great chance you've heard this sound. You hear it, I hear it every day, almost everywhere I go, even in the bathrooms, when people go to the sink. And it's just disgusting. I hate it so much. I mean, I used to get so angry whenever I heard that sound, and I still do sometimes. I've gotten a little used to it, but it's always a very unpleasant, just terrible sound. And both the old and young people do it. So it's quite a common thing to hear every day. Another con is that old people are not the most polite. I'm not saying that all old people in Korea are rude and unpleasant, but many of them are not the nicest. To be fair, the elderly generation grew up in a very hard time. During the Korean War, there was a lot of poverty. I mean, not that long ago, if you really think about it, several decades ago, Korea was one of the poorest countries in the world. So these people, when they were growing up, had to grow up very fast. They had to work in the fields. They had to do a lot of hard things, a lot of hard times. So with that being said, the older generation doesn't have, many people, they don't have the best etiquette. They're not very polite. Just, it is what it is. I still deal with it, but it is what it is. The hygiene is also awkward because in many bathrooms, people go to the bathroom, okay? And whether they pee or poop, a lot of the times people just don't wash their hands. I'm not joking. A lot of times people use the bathroom, whether they pee or poop, they'll just walk out. They'll just walk out of the bathroom. I see it so often, and it's nasty, especially the old people. I repeat, even if they pooped. In a lot of places, you have to share a bar of soap. So not every bathroom has the dispenser where the soap comes out and you wash your hands. A lot of places you got to share the same bar of soap. And for many people that might be nasty. I just deal with it, but it is kind of gross. This is a big thing I wanted to talk about. And I know a lot of foreigners struggle with this. Hierarchy. Okay? So what I mean by hierarchy is in South Korean culture, or perhaps Asian culture in general, like China, Japan, I'm assuming it's very similar. Everything's about age and your position. So like, for example, your boss, or if someone who's older than you have to respect them. Even if they're a bad person, even if they're a bad boss, even if they're just horrible at their job, the very fact that that person's older than you and has that position of boss, you automatically have to respect them. And I don't agree with it. So, like, some bosses like to yell at their employees. A lot of bosses take advantage of their employees, overwork them, and because they're the boss and because they're older, they deserve your respect. Me personally, I don't care about your age, whether you're older than me or younger than me. You do the right thing, treat people right, you have integrity, you have my respect. I don't care what your job is, even if you clean toilets. But in this society, everything's about your age and your rank, which means that if you're a foreigner, like myself, you're at the very bottom of that. So a lot of the times your opinion is not really taken seriously, and you just got to deal with it. It's a hierarchy-based culture, especially in the working force. Boss, person under the boss, you, and you as the foreigner at the very bottom. So keep that in mind. It's not very foreigner-friendly, which is another con. Now, I stress, if you live in another country, especially for a few years, you should try to learn the language as much as you can. You want to be fluent? Go for it. But you should at least try to learn basics. Maybe a little more than basics, but you should try to learn their language. From personal experience, if you don't know the language and you're constantly having to use translator, I promise you that gets old after a while and your life will be complicated. I know about maybe 10 to 15% Korean. I mean, I had a private tutor for several months, and my listening is much better than my speaking. And before I had the private tutor, I did self-study for a long time. So I can get by with basic things like ordering food, going to the store, asking how much something is. I understand numbers. I understand time. All those things. No problem. But advanced things, I need help a lot of the times. And it's not very foreigner friendly. So, for example, you download an app like Carrot Market. Carrots, like the vegetable. It's an app that a lot of people use to buy and sell things, and not a lick of English. So a lot of apps are not in English, and like where I'm from in Florida, there's English and Spanish. There's a lot of Spanish people who live in Florida, and not everyone knows English, so they have Spanish services available. Korea, not really. I mean, they have some English, but it's not much. It's either no Korean or whatever. Like, that's the problem. That's a con. Not very foreigner friendly. But it is what it is. I'm the foreigner. It's Korea's way. Take it or leave it. So I'm not here to trash Korea. Another con is, don't get me started on this because I could talk about this for a long time. I will describe it as ghosting on steroids. Ghosting on steroids. So in any culture, there was a duck behind me and it sounded like a dog. Anyway, in any culture, especially in dating, if someone doesn't want to talk to you anymore, typically the right thing to do, in my opinion at least, is to politely say something like, hey, you're a nice guy, or you're a nice woman, but hey, we're just not a good fit for each other, we're not compatible. You politely reject them. In Korean culture, they just ghost you. They'll block you, they'll ignore your message. You can go on like 2 or 3 or 4 dates. That person can just disappear. I was seeing someone for a good month, and that person, she just disappeared. Okay? Didn't even give me a reason, didn't give me an explanation. She just disappeared. So if you're coming to Korea hoping to date or wanting to date Korean people, I'm cautioning you, ghosting is a big thing here. If you get rejected, I promise you, 99.9% of the time, that's how it's going to be done. When it comes to friendships, it's not just dating, friendships too. If you have a conflict, okay, so let's say you have a Korean friend, okay, I can promise you, 9 times out of 10, or dare I say, 9.5 times out of 10, or 9.9 times out of 10, you get into a conflict with that person will also disappear. That person will ghost you. It is a problem in this culture, whether it's dating or friendships or relationships in general. When problems happen, typically Korean people just tend to disappear. And that's a problem. That's something I've been struggling with. And I came to this country hoping to make a lot of Korean friends. I had high expectations, but reality is that it is not easy. There are cultural barriers, language barriers. Even if the person speaks English, there are still cultural barriers. And unfortunately, like where I come from, if there's a conflict, or if someone wants to break up with you, you just talk it out. But in Korea, there's a problem, disappear. Keep that in mind. Even if the problem is very minor, I had a guy who ghosted me simply because of a small misunderstanding. So be mindful of that. Ghosting is big here. And that's why I said ghosting on steroids. Another con I wanted to speak about was the work culture. Korea has a very hard work culture. You work long hours, and even when you're not at work anymore, you're expected to work at home. I've had bosses that literally said, you need to do your work at home as well. You are expected to be married to your job. Typically, your boss is also married to the job. And because they're married to the job, they expect you to be married to the job. Forget if you have kids, forget if you have a wife or husband. You have to fully commit to your job. And a lot of times, you leave at a certain time. I'm staying later than I'm supposed to. And not just me, many people. So it's a hard work culture. You work long hours. Typically, you work from 9 to 6, 8:30 to 6, 8:30 to 5, but you'll be staying late a lot of the times. And the very desired jobs like Samsung and anything that pays well, they're even more stressed, I can guarantee it. So the work culture is hard, and as I mentioned, if you have a boss that is not the most pleasant person, it makes it harder. As I mentioned, the hierarchy thing. And as a foreigner, as I said, I should know Korean, or at least know some, but a lot of the times I have to go to these meetings, which I don't mind going to the meetings because I'm also working at the company, I'm working at the place. Sure, invite me to the meeting, but it's not just me. Many foreigners have complained about this. You go to a meeting, and the meeting's just in Korean the whole time. And the person who's doing the meeting expects someone to translate. And it's usually very awkward. If the person's holding the meeting, why can't you just speak some English? That's something that's always frustrated me and many foreigners when you have to go to these meetings and it's all in Korean and you're still expected to know what's going on. Because not everyone's always going to translate for you. And even if someone translates for you, they're not always going to give you everything. So that's something I struggle with and have struggled with and many foreigners struggled with. Now the next con is something that Koreans and foreigners agree on. The education system is pretty bad. I mean, it doesn't matter how old the child is, whether they're in kindergarten whether they're in first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, middle school, high school. Education system is pretty intense. So a lot of parents have their kids study so much and put so much pressure on them that kids literally, from the time they wake up to the time they go to sleep, study. I will make a video on Hagwons later, but for the sake of time, when I worked at Hagwons, when I taught middle school, I had students say to me, like 13, 14, 15-year-old students, that they're staying up till 2, 3 in the morning, which I think is terrible. And even young children in lower elementary have to have tests, and they have to study for their tests. And even when they're on break, they are expected to study for tests. When I was a kid, all I cared about was playing video games and going outside and playing sports. And my parents let me do that. But here in Korea, even if you're a kid, you have to study. You gotta be smart. You gotta be smarter than everyone else. It's competitive. Your whole life revolves around a test you gotta take in high school. And if you fail that test, essentially your life is ruined. In America, you don't have to go to college to be successful. You be a plumber, be an electrician, start your own business. But in Korea, the expectation is that you go to college and go to a good college. And if you don't go to that good college, you'll be judged and you will be, most likely won't find good work. So it's a toxic education system. And I can go on and on about it. But it is very toxic, and unfortunately, I think many students in Korea are very unhappy, and it's unfortunate. So I hope it gets better, but it'll be a long time before it gets better. Now, I'm not a woman, but I wanted to talk about this because I think it's important on behalf of my Korean friends and people I've known who have struggled with this. The beauty standards, I think, are pretty toxic. So, Asian people have smaller eyes, okay? It's a beautiful thing. God made you the way He chose to make you. Whether you got smaller eyes, big nose, small nose, brown skin, black skin, doesn't matter. White, doesn't matter. We're all made in different ways. But in this culture, there's a lot of pressure to look a certain way. So a lot of Korean people have plastic surgery. When you go to Seoul or near Seoul, it's very obvious. I mean, it's everywhere, but especially in Seoul, you'll see people with like double eyelids and like perfectly shaped noses, and the jawline is a certain way. That's plastic surgery for you. And the reason why a lot of people do that is because of the pressure, okay? The pressure to be attractive. Because in Korea, you got to put your photo on your resume, whether you're a man or a woman. But females typically have a lot of pressure to look pretty. So a lot of people think being pretty is having double eyelids, having a nice nose, having a nice jawline. And a lot of people, in my personal opinion, I think it's sad. Korean people don't really think it's a big deal. I digress. But a lot of people get plastic surgery. And a lot of people, from conversations I've had, feel suffocated by these beauty standards because they look in the mirror every day and they see these commercials and they see the posters on businesses. Everyone looks a certain way. So like in America and other places, celebrities typically don't look perfect, but literally in Korea, they all look perfect. And so a lot of women have pressure, toxic beauty standards. And I remember talking to a young lady and she said, I'm tired of caring about how I look every day. So to all the female Koreans out there, I am sorry about this struggle, and I hope that one day this issue can be resolved. No one should be insecure about how they look. No one should be selected for a job based on how they look. I mean, someone can be overweight, but be very qualified for the job, but the pretty person's going to get it just because they don't look as good. It's messed up. So I hear your struggle, and I'm here to spread awareness about it. Beauty standards are pretty toxic. I mean, if I had a daughter here, I don't think I'd want her to grow up here. So take it or leave it. That's a problem in Korea. There's another problem I've struggled with, another con. So as a foreigner, especially as an American foreigner, whenever I meet Korean people, a lot of the time, they just want to learn English. So here I am, and here other foreigners are, just want to make a friend, genuine friendship. But a lot of Korean people will just hang out with you to learn English, to improve their English. So therefore, it's like you're objectified. You feel objectified because people don't see you for who you are as a person. Many people just see you as the foreigner who speaks English. And I feel in my time in Korea, many people have just hung out with me to learn English. And be careful about that. I mean, there are Korean people who have genuine friendships with foreigners. And it's not just with friendships, dating too. There are people who have genuine partners who love them and want to be with them. But whether it's dating or friendship, be careful. A lot of people just want to improve their English. And if you're a foreigner who's lived in Korea or currently lives in Korea, you understand this struggle. Another thing, another con, summers suck, okay? They're brutal. Extreme humidity. Okay, so I live in Florida right now. I'm from Florida. Not born there, but I digress. I'm in Florida right now. It's hot. And when I walk outside, I sweat. But it's nothing terrible. In Korea, when I go outside, I am, within minutes, I'm drenched in sweat. And I got to change. It's very wet outside. It's very humid, very damp. There's bugs everywhere. It is very humid. That's my warning to you. Very humid. And summers are pretty brutal. So if you are the kind of person that sweats a lot, you better have some deodorant because you will stink and sweat a lot. But the interesting thing is that Korean people don't really sweat very much. I mean, obviously, people sweat, but like you'll see people wearing jeans, wearing long sleeve shirts tucked in. They're not sweating. It's kind of remarkable if you think about it, but that's just the way it is. Koreans have different bodies and they don't sweat as much. I digress. Summers are brutal. I wanted to just make it clear that if you're going to live in a foreign country, Korea was the first country I lived in as a foreigner. I grew up and I always lived in America, but Korea was the first country where I lived as a foreigner. My advice to anybody, whether it's Korea or anywhere, is to always lower your expectations. It's easy when you watch Korean dramas and you listen to K-pop and you have the Korean influence that's spreading globally. It's easy to romanticize, fetishize, fantasize about Korea. But the reality is, Korea, like any place, has their own problems, okay? And has things that need to be fixed, okay? So lower your expectations. Unfortunately, in 3.5 years, almost every Korean I've had, it's so many. It's like McDonald's, like a high turnover rate of friends that come and go. And I'm the kind of person who speaks my mind. So, like, they're not very. I'll just leave it at this. Korean people don't really like conflict, and when there's a conflict, they just keep it inside, okay? And it's been a struggle for me, so I don't really have Korean friends. I mean, I have maybe like a couple, but I don't see them much. In Korea, people are busy and work dominates a lot of people's lives, and unfortunately, the Korean friends I do have, I don't see very much. So keep that in mind. If you come to Korea expecting to make a lot of Korean friends, especially close friends, you might. But among the foreigners I know, it's been a struggle. Now, if you can fluently speak Korean, or at least 60-70%, you'll have more respect from people, and your odds of making friends will go up. But if you're just like me, someone who just knows enough to survive but isn't really advanced, it might be a little difficult for you. So just keep that in mind. Now, this is my own personal issue, but for some people, this is not an issue. For others, it is. Korea, even 2.5 years later, after COVID, we're still forced to wear masks all the time. And personally, I find it ridiculous. But I digress. 2.5 years later, we still have to wear masks. And I personally believe Korea will be wearing masks for the next several years. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think so. Anyway, those are my cons of South Korea. Once again, I want to make it clear, I'm not trashing Korea. Every country, including my own, has cons. I can talk about cons of my own country too, but not for this video. As always, I hope you guys had a great day, and thank you for tuning in to Blake Handshake, and have a beautiful day. Catch you later.